All right, if we create a custom brochure like this, on the one hand, we can see where there's probably obviously a fold, but down here, it's kind of a guess. And unless you've built over the top of somebody else's template and they know where the fold is supposed to be, you need to tell them where that's going to happen at. So that's what we're going to do in this lesson is show you how to create a custom export on your own that gives your printer your fold marks and your trim so they know where to do those things. So what we're going to do in this first lesson, I'm going to show you how to do this in InDesign. Then we'll do it again in Illustrator, and you can just kind of pick your poison, choose however you want to do it. I use both ways. It just really depends on the project. So let's go ahead and create a new document in InDesign. And I'm going to go ahead and create a 2-page document, one for the front, one for the back. And we'll turn off facing pages. We'll make this a 12-inch by 9-inch document, so it's the exact same size as our brochure. And then right now I'm going to turn off the gutter, and I'll put my columns at 3 since they were equal columns when we did this. I'm going to turn off my margins here. And then this is where the important part is. So for the bleed, we want to add an 1/8 inch bleed all the way around, which actually adds a 1/4 inch to the file size. So we'll put 0.125, that's an 1/8 of an inch on all sides. And then for the slug, what the slug is extra space around the document where you can put anything you want, notes to the printer or other design elements or whatever. It doesn't print, but it exports with the project so your printer can see that. So I'll just put a 2-inch slug on all sides here. And then I'll go ahead and hit OK. So now we've got a 2-page document here. And by turning off facing pages now, instead of these being stacked side by side, it's just 2 pages. All right, so we see our columns, everything's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is first bring in that final artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and go to File and Place right here. Command D is that shortcut. And let's find our final brochure files. So Final Sent, Finals. And let's go ahead and start with the outside of the brochure. I'll click Open. And then I'm just going to come up to the top left and paste it. And just to make sure it's where I want it to be, I'm going to come over here and make sure I align to page and then center and horizontal center that document. Okay, so now we're in good shape and it looks really terrible. Why is that? Well, remember, Illustrator or InDesign tries to kind of save you from yourself if you have a slow computer, and it turns down your display performance. So come to View, Display Performance, and turn on High Quality Display, and now it should look a lot better. All right, so we've got that going. Now on page 2, I'll double click there and hit Command D to place the inside of my brochure. I'll open that and I'll just click anywhere since I'm going to use this shortcut over here on the top right to align horizontal and vertical centers. So that looks good. My margins are in the right spot. Just double checking that that looks good and that falls exactly where I want it to be. So that tells me that I did set up my document correctly. All right, so that looks good. Now what we need to do, we could just export it just like this and add crop marks, but I do want to go ahead and spell out exactly where my fold is supposed to be. There's a couple ways we could do this. We could do it on each page individually, or I could use my A master and do it here. So what I'm going to do is jump over to Layers, and I'll rename this layer. Everything is currently on this one layer. I'll rename this Artwork, and that is where my artwork will live. And then I'll create a new layer above it called Guides. One thing to notice when we have the new layer icon open, if I double click on this, I can actually turn off print this layer. So you can put layers on top. So you could actually have a true guide on front of your artwork and then turn that off and it won't actually print. Whatever's on that layer won't print. But in this case, I want it to print. I'm going to put my guides in the slug area. So I want my printer to be able to see that. So I'll leave that selected and I'll click OK. Now what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit, and again we are working on our master page, but let me just make sure here. Yep, we're on our master page, and I'm going to use my pen tool to draw a line here. So I'm just going to click once and then shift click to another spot here right on that margin, and right now it doesn't fill with a fill or a stroke, so I'll come up here and let's go ahead and give it a cyan color so we can see it. And I'm going to change this from a solid line to a dashed line, and then I'm just going to move this up by holding down the shift key so it stays in line. I'm going to hit the letter T to get my text box. I'll click and drag, and I'm just going to type in the word fold. All right, so we got that set, and I'm going to change that to cyan as well. Hit OK. All right, so there's one fold mark. And then I'm going to highlight this, hold Alt, click and drag, hold down Shift to drag a copy. and you want to make sure you get this exactly on point here, right where that fold should be. So just make sure that that's lining up and that that's snapped in place. If you need to, you could come right down here in your document and then hold on shift and drag back up again to make sure it's right exactly where it needs to be. Okay, so there's my folds, and now if I come back over here to to page 1 and then to page 2, you see both of those come in the exact same spot. So we're in good shape now. What I can do is, and that's a ton of room for the printer. They don't really need that much space. They can figure it out. I could highlight all these and maybe bring it down a little bit. Let's try that again. One more time. I'm just trying to grab the top of this line. There we go. We'll use the arrow keys and we'll nudge it. How's that? There we go. By not selecting this bottom anchor, it stays in place, but I can just kind of nudge these down a touch. All right, that's good enough. That looks good. That will give them the idea, and I can just double check and make sure those folds are hitting exactly where I want them to on my artwork. Everything looks good. So now let's do two things. First, let's save this. So Command S to save. In case we ever need to come back to this document, I'll go to my brochure file, my design files. I'll create a new folder in here called IND. That's where I put my InDesign files, and I'll call this we'll just call this final brochure, and I'll hit save. Okay, so now what we can do, this is kind of where the magic happens as far as why we did all of this. We'll come over here to File, Export, and we'll jump into that final folder. So File Sent, back to the finals, final brochure. All right, let's go with guides. Okay, we're going to make a print, export, we'll hit save. And let's go through and look at all these settings real quick. We want it to export all pages. We want them as pages, not spread, so it looks good. All these options, those look good. We can view the PDF after saving, that's fine. I don't need to worry about these right now. We'll come to the compression, make sure it's not downsampling it to like 72 dpi or something for web. That looks good. Marks and bleeds, this is the whole reason we did this. So we're going to turn on all printers marks. So we're going to have crop marks, bleeds, registration bars, page information, and then also we're going to use document bleed settings. So we'll click on that and it'll pull in those settings we set up at the beginning, that 1/8 of an inch, and then we want to include the slug area as well, that 2-inch border where we put in our fold marks. I'll hit export. And now you can see this is the whole document size, but your printer can take this and they're actually going to print it on a larger parent sheet and then trim it back. So what this tells them is when they see this, okay, here's where this is intended to be folded, and they can see their registration bars, these color bars to see what your system outputted for a true cyan, magenta, yellow, black. And then we've got the trim for the actual document size where it shows where that starts, and then also our crop mark for where the intended trim is going to be. So that's how we do it. That is probably the best way to send a file to a printer who has no idea what your intended sizing is for this. But of course, hopefully you called them before the project started so they do have some kind of an idea. Anyway, hopefully that was helpful. And in the next section here, we're going to do the same thing but with Illustrator.